So the Hindi remake of Vikram Vedha is finally out by the same director and writer duo Gayatri and Pushkar. And it's time to do the comparison between the two, not to determine which is a better one, but to study what are the things that were changed and why. And do those changes make the narrative better or worse? Hello guys, I'm Nona Prince and let's begin with a comparison. But before that, do let me know in the comments below which one do you prefer. Of course, if it is in the language you prefer, that is Tamil and Hindi. But if that's not the case, and if you are someone who's not familiar with both the languages, do let me know which one do you prefer. Now the first thing I want to point out is in the technical department, the cinematography, and it's really surprising to know the difference. If you haven't seen my review of the Hindi remake, do check it out. Even there I mentioned that all the Saif Ali Khan scenes, apart from the ones he shared with Hrithik, are not done well, especially the performance wise. But in comparison with the original, even visually, the way it's shot, it's very mediocre. I don't know why. The cinematographer is the same for both the films. Then why is there such a big difference? You know, in the original there are so many long takes. The camera keeps moving between the characters. The blocking, the composition, the framing is so good. There's a scene where the whole screen is black, but there's a window cut through which we see two characters, and that's such an interesting shot. You know, the scene where Madhavan goes to meet the son of the person he killed in the beginning of the film, the way that scene is shot, the camera is placed behind bars and through that we are seeing them. In the beginning, when they're in the police station and the new recruit is asking who's Veda and they're talking about it, the camera keeps moving from one character to the other, and that keeps it interesting. But there's nothing of this sort in the Hindi remake. It's just plain and bland. It's just static camera placed and everyone's talking. There's no depth at all, and that also impacts the performances. There's a scene where Vikram and Simon, are sitting together and drinking. The way that is framed, they are sitting with their back to each other, which also adds a thematic value when later we find out the truth between them. Whereas in the Hindi remake, it's just a plain shot of them just sitting together. That's it. And the reason for this cannot be that they don't have the talent anymore. They did it in a previous film. Why wouldn't they repeat it here? Maybe to make it look different? No ways. It just felt that they didn't have time to shoot. Both the technical department and the actors didn't have time to rehearse. They didn't get enough time to plan it out. And that's just very obvious. Now, production value wise, the original is very culturally rooted. It's grounded in that sense. The costumes, the location, the way people talk to each other, it feels like it belongs to a particular place in Chennai. Whereas in the Hindi remake, it would have been set anywhere in North India. They do say it's Lucknow, but really if I say it was in Bihar or MP, nothing really changes. But there's one more thing to note, that the Hindi version is meant for a wider audience across different states. And that's why to make the film accessible to many people, you cannot really make it very culturally rooted. And that is a part of the commercial compulsion. That is one thing that the original didn't have to take care of. And all the films should be rooted. It just adds a lot of depth to the film. But when you're talking in terms of commercial cinema, you have to make it for a wider audience. And thus you have to let go of some things. The original is very realistic and feels natural at many places comparatively. Whereas the Hindi remake definitely have a bigger budget. The sets, the production, the action sequences, they are much bigger and intense. And in simple words, they wanted to make it all look epic. That is the preference they went in with the remake. Now before coming to the performances, there were a lot of scenes that were changed and merged in the remake. There were a lot of dialogues which were not there in the remake at all, which I think should have been there because they add a lot to the narrative and give it more depth. After the first encounter when they're called in by their higher ups and they talk about how these encounters are so unlawful. In the Hindi remake, the scene is much shorter, whereas in the original they go more in depth. Also after when Veda surrenders, in the original one of the higher ups is present outside and he says just get a confession out of him, whereas the in charge of the encounter team says let us just take him out and kill him, but he's shut down by the higher up. That part is totally missing in the remake, and I think this scene just gives you more hint at the end that the whole encounter team was bought up and their goal was just to kill him. And then there were a lot of small things. I felt in the original Veda and his brother has more banter between them, whereas in the Hindi one there was more respect and love. Now one thing I was not a big fan of the original was the tonal shift it takes at many moments, especially in the climax. The way they add the comedy background music and the interactions between Vikram and Veda, it just throws me off. Which in the remake they made it really serious. There's no banter going on between them. Still, all the shooting and running around in that warehouse was not that appealing to me, but it still feels better. Now let's come to what everyone wants to hear, comparison between Vijay Sethupathi's performance and Hrithik's. Now for Hrithik, I've already said in my review that he feels more menacing and more majestic. He just looks very cool on screen every time he comes on, and there is an effort to make him look like that. There's a lot of slow motion movements for him. Whereas with Vijay Sethupathi, he's really serious at moments, but there's a little quirky and goofy side also to him, and I think that is brought by Vijay Sethupathi himself because he's really good at it. Sometimes he will just add a touch of innocence to him. In many moments, sarcastically, he'll plead to Vikram, especially in that rain scene fight. He's pleading, sir, don't hit me, please, I'm sorry. Whereas in the remake, there's a moment where Hrithik just, puts his hand in front and says, sir, one second, and then like, come, take me on. And there's no such dialogue exchange. And I feel this difference comes from culture as well as the actor playing it. In the original, Vijay Sethupathi does it so well, and I feel like a character like that will be more accepted, which is not the same case with the remake, because Hrithik will not look good doing that, as well as the menacingness he's bringing to his his character will go away if he does that pleading thing. Now one big difference they did in the film is that how both Vedas try to establish themselves in the beginning. In the original, the Don Veda works for, his stuff is got stuck because there's police ahead and he has to get it out. And in the remake, some other gang has kidnapped the kid in their area, which is under the control of Don Veda works for. Now in the original, the way Veda proves himself shows how smart he is, how cunning he is. Whereas in the remake, I'm not really sure how Veda finds out the location where the kid is held, but then it's all about the action. He's just beating up everyone and he got the kid back. So they're setting up that he's a more badass and take down anyone. But I personally prefer what they did in the original. That sequence adds more to Veda's character. I noticed one very interesting difference between Hrithik and Vijay Sethupathi. I feel after just watching the trailer, everyone said that Vijay Sethupathi played Veda more subtly, whereas Hrithik is playing more loud. But there's this one scene in both the films which is done very differently and totally opposite. The scene where Veda's brother smokes for the first time and then Veda enters the room. In the original, suddenly Veda comes, hits the other guy that why are you making him smoke, and then takes a cigarette and starts smoking himself. And then he talks about Lord Shiva and the snake. Whereas in the remake, we see Veda entering the room. He noticed that his brother is smoking and he doesn't say anything. He just comes there and the brother just leaves the cigarette. And all of this is done in a very subtle way. There are few close-ups of Veda which tells you what's going on in his head. And then he gives that Lord Shiva and snake analogy which is slowly build up. It's a very serious moment. It is done in a mic drop way. So this change really surprised me. And those were all the major differences between both the films. Now personally for me, there are some things in the original which I like more, and then there are some things in the remake which I like more. But overall the story, the narrative structure is pretty much the same. So I feel at the end of the day it comes to your preference. Which one do you like better? Which one do you prefer? Which language works for you more? The remake feels more commercial and going for that epic moments, whereas the original is more grounded and culturally rooted, which if you understand will impress you more. If you think I made any sense in this video, check out this video next. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below and I'll see you next time.